Good afternoon to those joining. I think we're going to give it just a moment. I know folks are probably switching over to their breakout sessions from the main session, so we'll get started in just a minute or two.
Katie, do you want to share your slides?
Sure, I can pull those up now. Can everybody see the first slide?
Perfect.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, we're a couple minutes after, so hopefully everyone who intended to join the session today has had a chance to jump on. I really want to just start with a warm welcome to everyone joining this session today on legislative advocacy for children and youth with special healthcare needs. My name is Katie Layton, and I am the Director of Government Affairs and Programs for the Children's Specialty Care Coalition, and I will be moderating today's conversation. There we go. Let's see. So I was going to turn it over to our interpreter to give some instructions on how to access Spanish language translation for today's session. I think she is running a little bit late, so once she's able to join, I can circle back on this. So Allison, just let me know when we can come back to these instructions, and I'll move on for now. So just a couple of other housekeeping items. Both the chat and the Q&A box are open and active during today's session. So please feel free to introduce yourself or make other comments in the chat. But if you do have a question that you'd like answered during today's session, please submit that through the Q&A box. We will be monitoring the Q&A throughout the session, but we just want to make sure that your questions don't get buried in the chat in case that gets really active. So again, please use the Q&A function for your questions. All sessions are being recorded today, and finally, closed captioning is available, and you may click the CC icon to show captions. So in order to gain a better understanding of who's joining the session today, we are going to launch a quick poll where you can indicate which sector you are joining us from. So Allison, at this time, if you can launch that poll, I'll just go ahead and take a quick pause to allow people to answer.
Katie, our interpreter just joined, so if you would like to circle back to that, we may.
Okay, perfect. Yes, I will do that before we launch the poll. So let me just go back on the slides here. So yes, I want to introduce Maria Martin, who will be our translator today. She is going to take a moment to give some instructions on how to access Spanish language interpretation for today's session. So thank you, Maria. Go ahead and proceed with your instructions.
Actually, we lost her. I'm sorry. She was in and now she's out. That's so weird. I think there's something going on with that today. I'm so sorry. We'll do the poll now.
Okay, yes, let's do the poll and I can share out the responses and then hopefully we'll have her back by then. So if everyone can just take a look at the options up on the screen and choose the category that best represents you, that would be great.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes. Okay, now Maria Martin is here. I'll let Katie introduce
Yes.
Maria
Thank
and we'll
you.
do the interpretation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, so thank you, Maria, for joining the session today
You're very welcome.
yes, to provide the Spanish translation. So at this time, if you'd like to go ahead and give attendees instructions on how to access that, please feel free.
Ok, muchas gracias. Para los que están mirando esta presentación, por favor, si están teniendo alguna dificultad para conectarse o si necesitan mis instrucciones en cómo conectarse, por favor, hacérmelo saber. Esta presentación se trata acerca de la abogacía legislativa. Entonces, se llama Abogacía Legislativa para Niños y Jóvenes con Necesidades Especiales. Entonces, si ustedes necesitan entrar a esa sesión, por favor vayan a la sección de arriba que dice sesiones y luego se van hacia la parte de abajo que dice día 2 o day 2 y ahí van a buscar esta sesión. Si tienen alguna pregunta, me pueden mandar un mensaje directamente por medio del chat. This is Maria Martin. I'm going to be providing interpreting services for you. The name of this session is called Legislative Advocacy for Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs. If you haven't been able to join, please click on the top where it says sessions and then scroll down to where it says day 2 or today. And you're going to find the different groups or workshops that are going to be given. So click on the one that says Legislative Advocacy for Children and Youth. And if you have any other difficulties or problems, feel free to send me a direct message through the chat and I'll be happy to help you.
Thank you, Maria. Allison, are the poll results ready to display?
Yes, I can share it now. There we go. Sharing results. I'll leave it up for a second.
Awesome. Okay, so almost half parents and caregivers or family members of a child or youth with special healthcare needs, a fair amount of healthcare providers and county, state, federal government staff, and then about a quarter of us from family support organizations. So very interesting. I think that's good background to have going into our discussion. So I will go ahead and close that and we can move on. Let me just get back to the right slide here. So as I mentioned at the start, I am with the Children's Specialty Care Coalition. CSCC is a nonprofit advocacy association, and our members consist of over 3,000 pediatric specialty physicians statewide. And we strive to advocate for improved access to quality and equitable healthcare for children and youth with medical complexity. Much of what we do consists of advocating on legislation or other policies being proposed at the state level. And in the course of our work, we look to families as key partners because ultimately it is the children and youth with special healthcare needs and their families who are affected by the decisions being made by our elected officials and other key policymakers. And no one can convey your message better than you. We have a long-standing history and partnership with Family Voices of California, and we're very, very pleased to be a part of this year's summit. So the goal of today's session is to discuss how you can use your voice to inform and ultimately affect policymaking. Some of you may have attended the recent Disability Community or Disco Day at the Capitol. This was the largest convening of its kind at the Capitol since pre-pandemic. Family Voices played a really pivotal role in planning this successful day, during which advocates visited legislative offices with a couple of specific asks. One of those was asking legislators to reject a substantial budget cut to regional centers. This is a cut that was proposed in the governor's January budget. And because of this advocacy, it is my understanding that all members of the Assembly have now signed on to a letter opposing these cuts. We still have a ways to go before this year's budget process is finalized. So we do not yet know the ultimate fate of this proposed cut, but getting this level of engagement and support from lawmakers is a major feat and a tangible example of how your voices can affect the policy debates here in Sacramento. So today you're going to hear from 4 speakers who will all talk about advocacy through their own lens. Kelly McMillan will begin with an overview of what advocacy is, why it's important, as well as the current political and budget landscape we're operating in. You will then hear from Jenny McClelland, followed by Cecilia Rideout, who are each parents of children with special healthcare needs. They will discuss their experience with advocacy and pass on their lessons learned and advice to you. You will then hear from Dawn Adler, who has a history of working directly with children and youth with special healthcare needs, and who has spent the last 18 years working in and around the state capitol for multiple legislators. She will provide an insider's view of policymaking and how you as family advocates can affect the legislative process. Our goal is to bring you various perspectives, but you will no doubt hear some common themes and key takeaways throughout today's session. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to our first speaker. Kelly McMillan has been an associate lobbyist for Political Solutions, where she has worked on the health policy team since 2019. Prior to that, she served for over 20 years in the nonprofit and public service sectors in California, including 6 years as executive director and state chair of the Susan G. Komen Public Policy Collaborative. Kelly has been a champion for women's health throughout her career. She leads her firm on important issues such as telehealth expansion, maternal and infant health, children's health, the master plan for aging, CalAIM, and the state budget process. So Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Katie. I'm very happy to be here today. Welcome to everyone who joined and took the time out of their busy day to be a part of this very important presentation and 2 days of conference. It's pretty amazing. As Katie mentioned, I am a lobbyist, a registered lobbyist. I work with Political Solutions, and we are an all-women team. 14 of us have been in business for over 20 years. I work on the health team, as Katie mentioned, and I do represent the Children's Specialty Care Coalition, along with other patient and provider groups such as March of Dimes and also Bright Springs Health, which is a provider of home and community-based services for developmentally disabled and complex need population. Next slide, please. So what is advocacy? And I know some of you did participate in the Disco Day at the Capitol, but just to give you kind of a big picture of what it is and the difference between lobbying, we'll talk about that a little bit and why it's important. Obviously, it's an action directed at changing policies, positions, and programs of any type of institution. And wherever change needs to happen, advocacy has a role to play. If you think about kind of the history of time and significant changes that have been made for women and for families, it's been through advocacy. For example, the right to vote, to own property, to access education and healthcare and ADA compliances. All those things have happened through advocacy. You're influencing policy decision-making and those makers by implementing, things by education, reform, and also asking for accountability. Even though you have done the Disco Day, advocacy is a year-round activity. You have to continue to participate because there's a lot of pauses in the process. Next slide, please. So advocacy versus lobbying. So advocacy is a public support recommendation for a particular cause. And there's no limit of amount of advocacy that you can do as a person or an organization, such as a nonprofit. When you're lobbying, you're seeking to influence a politician or a public official on a particular issue. And there's also a difference between direct lobbying and grassroots lobbying. Family Voices is grassroots lobbying. I am a paid lobbyist, so I fall under a different category, different filing reports and record keeping and that kind of thing. So there's a little bit of difference between that. Next slide, please. So here's some concrete examples. You're telling, when you're advocating, you're telling official how policy affects constituents. You're meeting with them, you're educating them, you're sharing the problem that's happening. When you're lobbying, actually asking them to vote for or against or amend an introduction and introduce a particular legislation. And also lobbying can be creating an online petition asking public to contact their legislators to support or oppose a particular legislation. So when you're asking a legislature to take a position, you're lobbying. Next slide, please. Who are you lobbying? Well, let's start at the top. Our governor, Gavin Newsom, is a state leader. Obviously, he's 4-year terms. He's on the second of his 4-year term. And when the governor's important because he appoints a lot of positions that impact our lives, whether it's Department of Healthcare Services positions, he's filling judges and department heads and so on. So the governor has a lot of impact. And also, he can veto. So on lobbying the governor, the earlier you communicate any concerns about a bill, the better. In other words, the first time the governor's office is hearing about an issue should not be when it arrives at his desk. Remember, there's about 2,000 bills that arrive at his desk and start out, and roughly 1,000 of them get there. So it's also important, if you're going to be lobbying the governor, to approach the department heads that this bill or this action or this budget ask, if it has an impact on the department, you need to talk to them first, because that's the first question they'll ask. The governor's office will ask, have you talked to the department? They do communicate with each other, so it's important that you be aware of that and do your homework prior to meeting with the governor's office. Next slide, please. So, politics is constant change. So we know the governor's term will be coming up, and we have some candidates who have announced their candidacy for governor in 2026. The first candidate is Lieutenant Governor Lainey Kanopoulos. She's the first woman ever elected in the state of California. Very passionate about women's rights issues and higher education and climate change. And then State Senator Toni Atkins from San Diego, who is was our Senate pro tem. She's also announced her role, wants to run for governor. She's been a champion for affordable healthcare access, housing, LGBTQ issues, and women's rights issues. Another candidate that's announced is California State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, former state assembly member, council member, school board, a champion for education and mental health and school meals. And then former state controller Betty Yee has also announced her candidacy, former state board of equalization. She's also worked for the governor, Gray Davis, a few years ago. She was a budget chair. She's a champion for economic opportunities and fighting against discriminations. We also hear rumors that our Attorney General, Rob Bonta, who is also a spouse of an assemblywoman, Mia Bonta, may be running for governor. And then recently we heard our Department of Health and Human Services on the national scale, Xavier Becerra may be also running for governor. And then there's rumors about Katie Porter too, running for U.S. Senate. She ran for U.S. Senate and she may be running for governor. Stay posted because there'll be more candidates coming up, and we still haven't reached the deadline for people to make announcement. Of course, people announce early so they can raise money. Next slide, please. So state leaders, it's very important to know your state leaders. We have 40 senators, 80 assembly members. Senators serve 4-year terms, assembly members serve 2 years terms, and members are able to serve up to 12 years in the legislature. So there's a lot of turnover in the legislature because of term limits. And actually, in the last couple of years, we have seen unprecedented turnover. The last election cycle, nearly 1/3 of the members were brand new to Sacramento. Some termed out, some moved on. There was a lot of burnout after COVID, which we saw in a lot of other areas, sectors as well. But with new members, there's always an opportunity for education. You can share your mission, why California Family Matters makes such a difference. And it's important to come back every year to the Capitol because the faces and the leadership change. And it's important to be on top of that and educate the new folks about your important work that you do. Next slide, please. In the Senate, again, we have all new folks who chair very important committees. We have a new President Pro Tem and Mike McGuire. He has been in the Senate for a while. He was elected in 2014. He became the majority leader just recently and now serves as President Pro Tem of the Senate. Because Tony Atkins has term limits. So that was a very nice transition. And Mike McGuire is new to that position. And so he also appointed new folks to very important committees. We have a new budget chair with Scott Wiener. He's from the Bay Area. We have a new health chair with Richard Roth. He's from the San Bernardino Riverside area. And then our sub-budget 3, which is health, is Carolyn Menjivar, who was just elected a couple of years ago and is a fast rising star. She's from the San Gabriel Valley. And then our Human Services Chair, which I know a lot of issues fall under the Human Services Committee, is Senator Maria Alvarado Gil, who is from the Amador Foothills area. Next slide, please. In the Assembly leadership, we have some new faces as well. We have a new speaker, Assemblyman Robert Rivas. He took oath of office as a speaker in June of 23. He was first elected in 2018. He represents the San Bernardino area from the Central Valley. It's kind of interesting. We have 2 speakers now in the Assembly and the Senate who are from more rural and smaller areas, which is not normally the case. Normally, our speakers are from big cities, LA, San Diego, San Francisco. So it's nice to get a different perspective from the Central Valley and from the very northern part of California, which is where Mike McGuire is from. So in the Assembly leadership, we have Budget Chair Jesse Gabriel. He's from the San Fernando Valley. Health Chair is now Mia Bonta, who was elected in a special election in 21. She's from the East Bay Area, excuse me. And Human Services Chair Alex Lee was elected in 2020 as the very youngest ever Asian American elected to the legislature. Also, we have a new sub-budget 1 chair, Dr. Akila Weber. She was elected originally in 2021. She's currently running for Senate, and so she'll probably win that. So we may have another sub-budget chair after that election cycle. Dr. Weber is from San Diego, and she is an OBGYN. And then our budget sub-2 chair in the Assembly for Human Services is Corey Jackson. He was elected in 2022 as well, represents the Riverside County area, a social worker. He actually has a PhD in social work and came from a local school board. Next slide, please. So as you all know, and any of those that participated in disco at the Capitol, you know that the budget is a huge issue this year. We're facing very serious problems. We have a $73 billion shortfall, largely in result to a revenue decline in 20 and 23. The legislature has taken early action in early part of April to reduce that deficit. They came together and agreed, reduce the deficit by 17.3. Obviously, we still have some ways to go. So the governor's May revise will be out around May 10th. And then the legislature has about a month to deliberate and pass a balanced budget by June 15th. And that almost always does happen by deadline, because if they don't pass the budget deadline, no pay. So there's a big incentive there. Next slide, please. Just wanted to share a real quick little easy tool if you need to know who your legislature is. online. It's a handy tool to find your representative. You just pop in your address and your state legislators will come up. It's Find Your Representative online, easy to use. I use it all the time. Sometimes when I'm trying to find, we have a lobby day and I want to know, you know, the participants, who's their legislator. So we make sure we meet with those folks. Next slide, please. Just a real quick reminder on how a bill becomes a law. So bills are introduced in January, followed by committee hearings and fiscal committee hearings, and then to the floor. So if it's an assembly bill, it goes to the assembly floor, and then it starts all over again in the process, goes to the second house through the policy, fiscal committees, and then on to the governor. Next slide, please. So here's where we are in the process. For 2024, there has been over 2,000 bills introduced, 1,500 of those in the Assembly, 600 in the Senate. Here is the calendar deadline that's for the rest of the year. Friday, this week has been very busy because we do have this big policy deadline tomorrow, excuse me. And the last day for to hear non-fiscal bills is May 3rd. So, and then mid-May, as I mentioned, the governor's budget revise will come out. And then the 17th is the last day for fiscal committees to pass their bills on to their floor. And then May 24th is the last day for each house to pass the bills in their originating house. That's a big deadline. The budget bill deadline, which I mentioned on the 15th. The last day for policy committees to meet is July 3rd before they break for session. For the summer break, which is for a month. And then the last day for each house to pass the bills is August 31st. And then the governor has a month to decide whether or not to sign or veto the bills. That's the process for the year. And then we start all over again in January. Next slide, please. So anyone can submit a letter of position on a bill. There's lots of ways to share your voice. And so there is a portal that's set up on the California legislation.ca.gv. And what you do is you register as a one-time registration. You obtain a username and a password. And anyone, registered lobbyists can do it, organizations, an individual affiliated with an organization, individuals can submit a position letter on a bill. So it's a great tool to use. It's a great tool to share with other people to let them know they can submit a position, and they do become official once they're submitted to that letter position portal. Next slide, please. So working with elected officials, and you'll hear some more about this with some of our other presenters today, but lobbying really is all about education, as I said earlier. You're just simply educating them about the issue. Remember that not every not every legislator is an expert on every field. You are the expert. You are the one who knows your issues. And when you come to them, they appreciate it. They want to hear you. They want to hear your stories. So it's also important to come and when you do working with elected officials to provide the tools that needed, fact sheets, issue briefs, anything that they can look over and read. And especially when you meet with staff, because then they will share that information with the member. And sometimes the meetings are very brief, so it's important to just stick to the facts. And also, I can't emphasize this enough, and I know you'll hear this a few times today, share your story. Let them know what's going on in your life, with your family, with your children, what is happening and how these laws directly impact you. That's what they want to hear. And also read their bio. There may be a connection there to some of your issues, knows what motivates the decision makers. And then it's really important to follow up and keep in touch with the staff and let them know that you appreciated their time. You can't say that enough because they are very busy, and taking the time to meet with you is a really important thing. So next slide, please. I'm sure many of you heard of this, but there is a wonderful resource Family Voices have is through project leadership. We have speakers going to be talking about that today, but it's an advocacy training with the overall goal of increasing the number of family members of children with special health care needs to come and advocate. It's a great curriculum that's put together with kind of the nuts and bolts of advocacy in a 7-session training series. So, and again, we'll hear a little bit more about folks that have actually graduated from that program and what a difference it made. Next slide, please. As many of you know, might tell, advocacy is really important. It's a very passionate thing for me. As Katie had mentioned, I came from the nonprofit world where I was put into public policy opportunity. I saw bills change. I saw lives change because of the advocacy work that we did. I worked in breast cancer for a long time, and we passed a bill that actually changed the age for screening for women. It used to be 50, now it's 40 because of the work we did. We changed the price of chemo drugs because of the work that we did. And when I saw that happen, I knew that advocacy was the place I wanted to be. And it really makes a difference because it affects your quality of life, right? The laws that happen in the state capitol affect your family, your education, your home, your community, your career, and health. And we are very proud to represent the Children's Specialty Care Coalition as they work through the process of making sure that this CCS program is protected and that pediatric subspecialists can do their work in the state of California. Also through March of Dimes, we're working with the maternal health and babies. And again, families and children of youth with special health care needs have a very significant real world experiences and stories to tell that the legislature needs to hear, the departments need to hear. You can change laws, you can have an impact, and your voice does matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for setting the stage for this session with all of that wonderful information and for giving us a few concrete ways families can make their voices heard and engage in the process. Just as a reminder for attendees, we are taking Q&A throughout the session, and we'll have dedicated time after we've heard from all of our speakers to answer your questions. So please submit any questions you have in the Q&A box. So next, I would like to introduce our first parent advocate panelist. Jenny McClelland is from Fresno. Her main advocacy focus is on issues that affect medically fragile, technology-dependent children and adults. Jenny also works with a national advocacy group called Little Lobbyists, and I am so pleased to welcome her now to share more about her family, the issues she cares so deeply about, and how she has affected change in these areas. So Jenny, I'll now turn it over to you.
Thank you for hosting this panel. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm very excited to help people in the audience realize their own power and use it to make the world a better place. Can I have the next slide, please? My name is Jenny McClelland. My pronouns are she, her, and I am mom to James. My son James is 13. I've included a family picture where we're all looking in the same direction at the same time. If you guys are moms, you know how difficult that is to do. The picture up top is when he was younger and adorable. We set up a picture where he had all his medical equipment lined up as something to bring with us for advocacy. It's one thing to bring your child to an advocacy meeting. Sometimes they're squirmy. It helps to have a photograph that humanizes the child and says, hey, this is me. I'm cute. I'm having my life, but this is what I need. And now since he's a teenager, he is in the marching band this year. So the bottom picture is him with his vibraphone. He figures out a way, which is something that's very important for kids, is to facilitate them figuring out a way to live in their own bodies and work things out. I'll take the next slide. The first step is to have a role model. I think as women, as moms in advocacy, it's hard to see yourself doing something that you've never seen someone do before. My role model is Elle Woods from Legally Blonde. You change the law. What? Like it's hard? It's very doable, and something that I think that Elle Woods had that I want to be able to put forth into the world is thinking, here's the problem. I'm going to solve it. How are you going to help me? And if you're not going to help me, get out of my way. I'll take the next slide, please. My advocacy journey is that I started with a big swing. I started in the fight in 2016 to save the Affordable Care Act. One thing about my son is that, like many medically complex children, he's a lifetime limit baby. We tend to forget how bad health insurance was in the time before the Affordable Care Act. My son is probably the first generation of children who are as complex as he was, and our family didn't have to go bankrupt when he was born. Here's what's up with lifetime limits. Prior to the ACA, your insurance company could put a limit on how much they would spend to keep you alive forever. So it's called a lifetime limit. A common number for lifetime limits was $1 million, which seems like a lot of money. But in healthcare dollars, you can burn $1 million in the blink of an eye. Every premature baby who spends 6 or 7 months in the NICU is a lifetime limit baby. Every child with a complex medical condition who needs expensive pharmaceutical drugs, lifetime limits. It cut across families in a way that was complicated and hard to understand. So obviously, there was a ton of work from disability justice and healthcare groups to preserve the Affordable Care Act. One thing that I learned with little lobbyists is that by using children, it brings a purity of moral standing to the issue. You can't make a valid argument that my son exceeded his right to exist when he was 6 weeks old and he hit that $1 million work. It was important to bring that story out to the public. And so one of the hardest things about advocacy is that you have to get used to being in the public eye. And I just kind of ripped that Band-Aid off by going on the national stage from the very beginning. Something that I learned is that national policy is really hard. You have to pick your battles and be ready for a fight. By comparison, California battles are easy. You are working with an administration and a legislature that wants to help. When you talk to your legislators, you're not trying to build programs from scratch. All of these programs that we spend all this time complaining about, CCS, IHSS, a whole child model, all these things, these are programs from a legislature who is trying to fix things. And when you go to a legislator in California and you say, this isn't working for my family, here's why, they start from a place of wanting to hear it, wanting to listen, and wanting to fix it. So when you are trying to solve a problem in California, pick a battle and then be ready to win. I'll take the next slide. Even though you should have big goals, you have to get specific because so many things in life, you have to dive really deep on policy. You can become an expert in a small program that affects your child's life and people will come to you about it. I have to clarify my goals, right? My big picture goal is that I want disabled, medically fragile children to be able to get the care they need to live at home with their families. That's a big goal. How do I turn that into action? I look at the little things. I look at home nursing. What are the rates? How can families get it? Is there competition in the market to make sure that these companies are providing appropriate services? Do the children have access to pediatric day healthcare programs? The waiver programs that children need to access these services, are those functional? What about school? How are they getting to school? These are all, any one of these topics is huge on its own. I drill things down to my layer of focus, which is that disabled, medically fragile children need to live at home. That doesn't mean I don't have allies in all of this advocacy work. When people are working with children with hearing loss or children with autism, I love what they're doing and I support what they're doing. When I'm putting my time and energy into things, I drill down into my specific area of expertise, and then I support other people who are working in their areas of expertise. And there's always going to be a ton of overlap. I'll take the next slide. Get even more specific. Here's one of my success stories as an advocate. I became single-mindedly obsessed with a niche program, and I became an expert in it. I care about the home and community-based alternatives waiver. It's a federal 1915C Medicaid waiver that provides institute. See, look, you all tuned out because I drilled deep. I drilled too deep into the policy side and you lost the point, right? The thing I care about is this little program, and it helps kids come home and live with their families. You have to be able to switch back and forth. So when you're talking to other advocates, you can kind of geek out about these programs and all these terms and all these acronyms. When you're talking to normal people, and when I say normal people, I include the legislators, because even though they're in charge of things, they don't always have that deep policy knowledge. You got to scale it way back. And you can't say all of these complicated acronyms. You have to say, look at this baby. He needs to be at home with his family. He needs nursing to make that happen. How are we going to fix that? And you always scale it back to the human touch. I'll take the next slide. Your secret weapon, this is my favorite trick. Ask your legislator for casework. Not all advocacy has to be big picture, big policy stuff. If you're having a problem with a state agency, you can call your legislator and ask them to fix it as a completely one-off individual thing. And guess what? Legislators are actually paying attention to all of the casework that their office does. So when you go to a legislator's office and talk to someone who's going to do casework for you, they're keeping a file to say, you know what? A lot of people in my district have been having problems with CCS. Let me make some calls to DHCS to see what's going on. Even when you're just fixing one little problem for yourself, you're actually fixing it for everyone else, because when you bring legislators' attention to these problems, even at the smallest bite-sized level, they can't stop themselves from fixing things. That's why they got into the legislator, and that's why they're doing these things, is that they want to fix problems. So a lot of times the barrier is that moms think this is too big, this is too hard. It's not too hard to make a phone call and let your legislator's office take it from there. They love solving problems. My final piece of advice is to grow up. I'll take the next slide. Something that moms of children it's a trap that we fall into. We want to make the programs work for our children. The thing about children is they always grow up. My biggest word of advice is to make friends with adults in the disability community. I'm very fortunate in that my son has a skeletal dysplasia. That makes us members of the Little People of America, which is an adult-run advocacy group that spans lifetime advocacy for the entire group. So it's not just moms of little kids trying to figure out how to handle school. It's young adults entering the working world. It's adults who are navigating their own lives, and you can form meaningful, valuable friendships and be a part of a community that's bigger than you. You have to learn about the programs that are going to exist for your child when they grow up. And if they don't exist, you've got to start building them. You have 18 years. Disabled children grow up to be disabled adults. And I think the key, especially in parent advocacy, is to advocate for policies that help people, not just kids, so that when it's time for children to age out of this awesome pediatric system that we've built, they're aging into a system that's equally functional for the lives they're going to live as adults. And I very much appreciate everyone's time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. You are such a tremendous advocate. You truly have become an expert in areas that not many people are well versed in, but that have such a huge impact on many lives. I know I've personally deepened my knowledge of things like the HCBA waiver because of you. So thank you for all of the great work that you are doing. I'm going to move to the next slide. Hang on just a second. So next we will hear from our second parent advocate, Cecilia Rideout. Cecilia is a mother of two and is a former sports TV producer turned marketing executive and has now shifted her focus to advocacy work. She serves as a parent advocate for the Center for Autism and Neurodevelopmental Disorders and is a founding member of the Empowering Women of Color Parent Support Group. Cecilia is going to tell us more about her family and her advocacy journey and inspiration. So Cecilia, I will go ahead and turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Katie. Hi, everyone. I'm Cecilia Rideout. A little background on me. I was born and raised in a suburb of Seattle, Washington. I'm the oldest daughter of 4 in a mixed Filipino-Italian family. And navigating that cultural blend in an environment that looked nothing like my home life is where I pinpointed my drive for advocacy. As the only kid of color, with the exception of my older brother, in elementary and middle school, I often felt like I was on the outside looking in, just so different than my peers, and that was incredibly isolating. So I came to Southern California for college and dove headfirst into dual degrees in television and broadcast journalism, along with political science. I always wanted to be on the Sports Center, but I also found so much fulfillment bringing about change. I still remember creating a petition in the 6th grade. I wanted the girls in my Catholic middle school to have the option to wear uniform pants and not just skirts. And I'm very proud to say that after a full petition and some meetings with the principal, we compromised with girls being allowed to wear pants during the winter months. But today, only 10 years later, girls have the option to wear whatever uniform they'd like, skirts or pants. So post-graduation, uncertainty hit me really hard. I wanted to do big things and I wasn't sure which path to go down. So being a sports broadcaster had always been my dream, but I felt so passionate about truly making a difference. My racial politics professor actually enlightened me when he told me that just by being on TV, I could be a game changer in the diversity scene. Growing up, I rarely saw faces like mine reflected back at me, not in school, not at the mall, and definitely not on the screen. And it left me feeling pretty self-conscious. So now as a mom raising 2 amazing daughters, diversity is my top priority. From toys to books to the content they consume, I want them to know that they belong no matter what they look like. I'm imagining the world that I want for them. Next slide, please. Now, let me introduce you to my favorite people in the world, my amazing family. My husband and I have 2 daughters. Our oldest is 6.5, while this happy little tank is almost 2. I consider myself incredibly fortunate to have found a partner in this life who's as passionate about advocacy as I am. It's not just about us anymore. It's about shaping a world where our kids can thrive, where diversity is celebrated, and where everyone has a voice. Next slide, please. From the front lines of rallies to the streets of marches, he's been there, amplifying our voices alongside mine. Whether it's calling our representatives, writing letters, or sending off emails, he's been relentless for our family's quest for change. And what's truly remarkable is when our eldest entered the scene, she didn't just tag along, she joined the movement. I'll never forget the first taste of advocacy at just 6 months old, that photo in the bottom left corner, with a sign we hung from her stroller that read, "I can't walk or talk, but I can march." She became our little symbol of hope and just a reminder that change starts from the very beginning. Next slide, please. But today I'm here specifically to talk about my oldest daughter. She's in the 1st grade. She loves singing and dancing. She loves math. She loves reading and listening to books. And she loves anything athletic, including gymnastics, basketball, and yoga. My daughter was also diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder when she was about 2.5. She was our first child, and without other children to compare her to, we relied heavily on our pediatrician and their feedback. We noticed she wasn't hitting certain milestones and were dismissed by her first pediatrician about a language delay. told that her speech would come and that because she was so advanced in her motor skills, that we shouldn't worry about her speech. We changed pediatricians and I finally felt validated in my concerns. We got a referral for a speech assessment and referred us to the regional center. And to be completely honest, autism wasn't even on our radar, and I had no idea what the regional center even was. We were quickly thrown into the deep end of early intervention and various services and just overwhelmed by acronyms and various therapies. And I'm a planner by nature. I read maybe not all the baby books, but a lot of baby books when I was pregnant, and there isn't a what to expect when you're expecting a special needs child book. And so I started educating myself on treatments and services, what I can do to support her, what resources are out there. And it honestly felt like I was learning a new language. Having a child with a seemingly invisible disability is a path I never anticipated. Next slide, please. And she alone is my why. Suddenly I was forced to slow down and see the world through my daughter's eyes. It was this whirlwind immersion in understanding that her way of processing, seeing, and grasping the world is completely different than mine or that of her neurotypical peers. It was a shift in perspective. I needed to pivot and try to understand what my daughter is experiencing. She's frustrated because she's trying to communicate with me, but she can't do that verbally. She's overstimulated by the noises around her, which I'm able to tune out or ignore. She's upset and she's angry, and to the outside world, she probably looks disobedient, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Next slide, please. When I reflect on my journey in advocacy and the driving force behind it, I always come back to my daughter. She's my why. She's my motivation to push for change and create a better world. But there's also this powerful quote from Rita Pierson's TED Talk that sticks with me. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend taking a couple minutes to watch it. But she says, every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. Now, Rita was speaking to educators, but those words hit me right in the heart. From the moment we embarked on early intervention and received my daughter's diagnosis, I knew my role was clear: to be her unwavering advocate, her champion, to fight for her when she couldn't, and to ensure her voice is heard loud and clear. Next slide, please. So I signed up for every webinar and training I could find and found a great parent support group through UCI Center for Autism and Neurodevelopmental Disorders. I quickly became heavily involved in the Parent Collective and was asked to be a part of the Empowering Women of Color group by my amazing mentor at the center. With the support of DDS funding, we've been able to focus outreach to our African American, Black, and Caribbean, ABC, families. Our ABC workshops and Empowering Women of Color Parent Support Group have been thriving hubs of empowerment, education, and community for families like ours. As you can see on screen, Black children on average receive a diagnosis of autism at age 5.5 years. Other children are diagnosed on average at about 18 months, and that's just an alarming disparity. This difference often leads to delayed or no treatment. And as we all know, early intervention is so key. From the onset, our mission at Empowering Women of Color has been clear: to provide additional training to families of color, ensuring equitable access to care for our loved ones, and empowering us to navigate the complexities of regional center services with confidence and ease. We recognize the need for specialized support tailored to the unique challenges faced by African American, Black, and Caribbean families, and we've been committed to filling that gap ever since. Next slide, please. Being part of Empowering Women of Color has opened doors I never imagined. One of those doors led me to the Family Echo Autism Journal Club, a collaboration between Nationwide Children's Hospital and Western Michigan University School of Medicine. This experience was a crash course in scientific literacy, teaching me how to dissect and analyze research papers with a keen eye, especially in the realm of autism. It equipped me to bring research into various doctor's appointments and really collaborate with my daughter's care team. But that was just the beginning. Enter Project Leadership, courtesy of Family Voices of California. This program wasn't just a stepping stone, it was a rocket launch. It equipped me with invaluable tools and insights, and it propelled me towards a path I'd once only dreamed of, really empowering me to take those bold steps forward. Next slide, please. Project Leadership was a revelation for me. It was a profound lesson in the power of my voice. It showed me that my lived experience and unique story carry weight, that they matter in ways I never fully grasped before. Through introspection and courage, even in moments of vulnerability, I discovered the true why behind my advocacy journey. And with that understanding, I became a catalyst for change. It's through Family Voices of California that I joined the state's Interagency Coordinating Council on Early Intervention. And this role not only allows me to share my unique experiences, but it also empowers me to collaborate with changemakers who hold the keys to shaping a brighter future for California. Project Leadership didn't just bolster my confidence, it ignited a fire within me. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. It set me on a path of purpose and possibility. Next slide, please. And that path took me to Sacramento for Disco at the Capitol. This was a pivotal moment for me. It wasn't merely a commitment, it was a deeply personal mission. At Disco, I transformed my advocacy into tangible action. I had the opportunity to be a team lead for lobby meetings, and I joined forces with fellow advocates to amplify our message, which was safeguarding services for Californians with developmental disabilities and preserving Medi-Cal. Marching from the Capitol on to the state legislature's swing space, I felt a profound sense of validation in the company of fellow advocates. Our meetings with legislative offices from Newport Beach to Rancho Santa Margarita reaffirmed the power of collective action. In those moments, surrounded by empathy and solidarity, I was not only heard, but deeply understood. Parenting my daughter with ASD can feel isolating, but amidst this community, I'm incredibly inspired. Next slide, please. So let me encourage you to share your story. Your experiences matter more than you may realize. In the moments when it feels like you're navigating this journey alone, remember you're not. There's a community out there ready to listen, ready to empathize, and ready to walk alongside you. You're part of something bigger than yourself, and your voice adds to the collective narrative of strength and resilience. Don't underestimate the power of your story. It has the potential to inspire, to uplift, and to connect us all. Next slide, please. I will end with this. To the untrained eye, this may look like a fun collage of photos of my daughter, and it is, but these pictures mean so much more. These pictures represent all the work she puts in and the huge wins we celebrate. Starting in the top left, my daughter played her first season of baseball, but it's not the team sports that's the win. It's the fact that she wore a hat for every game and wore the batting helmet. And this girl does not like things on her head. Moving to the right on the top is my daughter at the dentist. And I know Nick touched on this, and there's a breakout going on right now about dental care, but I had to write a story. I had to find songs on YouTube about going to the dentist, and I even ordered a set of dental tools off of Amazon so we could practice at home. And I'm happy to report that while going to the dentist isn't a breeze, those twice-a-year visits are far less painful than they used to be. Back to the bottom left is my daughter walking hand in hand with a classmate from the school gate to her classroom. Just last year, she needed to walk back with her teacher or an aide. She also doesn't really like touching people, but now she independently walks back to her classroom. And on this day, she was actually really excited to see her friend. She even ran up to say hi to him. Next to that is her purchasing a stamp from the post office to mail home a Valentine she'd made. seeing her learn this type of independence at school is really exciting for us. And next to that is my little runner. She's the only special ed student in the school's marathon club, which is kids from kindergarten to 6th grade. And every Friday morning before school, her and I are out there running around in preparation for the Kids Run the OC marathon that we'll be doing next weekend. She's gained so much independence, and we've seen so much growth in her from only doing it the year prior. Next to that is a very happy girl with a donut. I think it's safe to say we're probably all this happy with the donut, but this was a win for us because we spent quite a lot of time teaching her how to bite into her food, to not shove the whole thing in her mouth or to have to cut things into bite-sized pieces. So learning how to take a bite of something was a win for us. And lastly is our most recent trip. It's a photo on the top right. She and I flew to Seattle for a weekend trip. And here we are sitting and having dinner at the airport. And yes, I did pay $30 for that mermaid she picked out at Hudson News, but we made it through security and successfully used a public bathroom and didn't have any screams throughout the entire flying experience. And I'm just so proud of her. In closing, I just want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Family Voices of California and my inspiring fellow panelists for providing this platform to share my story and my journey. Your unwavering support and commitment to advocacy are the driving forces behind our collective fight for change. So let's stand together, keep our voices strong, and continue to champion for a future where every voice is heard and every story matters, because together we're unstoppable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. I have a huge smile on my face just looking at all of these different wins that you described. That was very fun to hear about. And thank you in general for sharing about your beautiful family and just the background into why you chose to focus on advocacy, as well as for lifting up the voices of women and children of color. You're doing such amazing work, and we appreciate your willingness to share with us today. So our final panelist, let me get this slide to go here, there we go, is Dawn Adler, who is the Legislative Director for Assemblywoman Sharon Quirk-Silva, who represents California's 67th Assembly District, which includes parts of Orange and Los Angeles counties. Dawn has worked for many other prominent members of the legislature since the early 2000s. She has such an interesting history prior to joining the legislature, including as a mental health counselor and medical social worker, but I'm really going to leave it to her to go into more details on her story, as well as her perspective and advice to families on how they can affect policymaking within the state legislature. So Dawn, I am officially going to turn the microphone over to you now.
Thank you, Katie, and it's really truly an honor to be here. Can I have the next slide, please? I think it's more important that I give you, it'll be helpful to give you some of my background, which led me to my work in the California legislature and why empowering families is so important to me. I was born in New York City. I'm one of 5 siblings. My youngest brother was born with a genetic blood disorder. My older sister and my younger brother were both born profoundly deaf. So I guess it was natural for me to be an advocate, but I did have a strong foundation. My mom, who was a single mom, she had to learn, research, and empower herself with the knowledge to be the best advocate for all her children through that IEP process and through our complex medical system. She's truly my heroes, as with the other 2 moms that spoke today. I always knew I wanted to work with children who were deaf and their families, but I knew I didn't want to teach. And I went to Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. It's a renowned university for deaf and hard of hearing, and you could get your master's degree if you're going to work with deaf children. Around the same time, I also volunteered on a unfortunately, at this time, my brother had passed away. And after the time, I started volunteering on a national and then international level with a nonprofit and an NGO that advocated with for children and adults with hematology disorders, including sickle cell anemia. So after I graduated from Gallaudet, I worked for a nonprofit out of Oakland and San Francisco. And we were able to work with children and young adults and their families in their schools, in their homes, in the community, providing mental health counseling, family communication, and advocacy. But because of my volunteer work on the international level, I was given the opportunity to work at UCSF Medical Center with their pediatric and adult sickle cell and hemoglobinopathies program. And I truly loved working with the patients and their families. However, I was increasingly frustrated with how the laws were hindering access to care. I remember, and I know you're going to laugh, but this is a true story. I remember after a frustrating 45-minute call with a Medi-Cal representative, I had a moment. Let's just say some explicits were made and my blood pressure was not happy. I literally said to myself in my little office, out loud, mind you, thank God nobody else was there, Dawn, either shut up or do something about it. The next thing I knew, I was researching internships and fellowships, and I thought it was only DC, but I found and applied to the California Fellowship Program. And to my shock and happiness, I was accepted into the Assembly Legislative Fellowship. I want to mind you that most fellows are just out of college, and I was in my very late 30s. So this is to tell you it's never too late to learn and to get involved. I started my fellowship placement with the chair of the Assembly Health Committee, Assembly Majority Leader Dario Froma. Unfortunately, or fortunately, 3 weeks later, he became the Assembly Majority Leader. To say I was thrown into politics is an understatement. But I was fortunate because I had a great member and a great chief of staff who was my mentor, and I learned so much, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But I also realized that in order to do good policy, you really need to know the politics. And I hope to share some of that with you today. Most of my tenure in the legislature has been as a legislative director. My primary responsibility is managing the member's legislative bill package, meaning all the policy issues he or she will be tackling in the legislative year. The thing that I most love about my role is that I get to meet and talk to so many different people, organizations, advocates, lobbyists. I get to listen to their concerns, their stories, and their passions. I also help to bring people together who are not maybe on the same side of an issue. And we try to find a middle ground. It's not easy, that's for sure. However, I believe my career and experiences before coming to the Capitol has allowed me to connect with parents and patients and students on a very different level. And I'm honored to share my perspective as a legislative staffer and provide advice to you families on how to be most effective when advocating on the state level. Next slide, please. Let's start with how policy is introduced. Sometimes people wonder, well, where does legislation come from? It comes from so many sources. It could be a problem with current law that somebody comes to us for, a need for a new law, issues in the district. So if you're a constituent, I know some of the mothers and Katie had said, bring the issues to the district. Lobbyists, some of their clients have issues in law and need changes. We also have, in the last 20 years, since I've been here, we've seen a big increase in organizations and advocates come to us. And that's been the most rewarding, but also personal experiences. I've witnessed members who've had personal issues in their family with healthcare needs or educational needs that where they became the champion of those needs. And sometimes it comes from constituents that just, like Jennifer said, called their district office for help. And that's where an issue came to light. Family engagement in policymaking, I have to say, is very important because you know your child, You know what you've been through, and you know how you tried, what you did to try to navigate our crazy state systems. And family engagement and advocacy has had successful outcomes. For example, I remember my first year, a brand new senator came, and he was talking on a bill on cord blood. You know, having a brother with a genetic blood disorder, and then working with sickle cell, my ears popped up. And I thought it was a very interesting bill because what it did was the storage of cord blood is very expensive. So he said any family that has a child with a genetic disorder there where cord blood may be able to cure their disease, that they are allowed to store their future, you know, if they have other children, to see if they're a match. And I thought that was very interesting. Also, we did a bill, my boss did a bill on special education. You would think it's the simplest thing, and how can this be a problem? But a school had talked to a consultant, a committee consultant, and then said, you know, we're not allowed to have the deaf students and their hearing peers in their yard together at the same time during lunch break. And I was like, that can't be right. And it's true. They had to ask for a waiver from the state every 2 years to allow the students to be integrated for lunch. I didn't understand how that did not fall under the ADA federal law, but we thought it was an isolated incident. And as the bill moved forward, it got so much support from both sides. And after the bill was signed into law, we've gotten so many calls from across the state saying, thank you. We've always had to sit there and try to get the waiver every year. That's staff time, teachers' time that could be used to educate our children and not have these waivers, you know, preventing kids to work together. Next slide, please. Before you start, I want to, my apologies. Before you start advocating, one of the things I learned when I first came here is do not reinvent the wheel. Look to other similar advocacy groups. In the last 10 years, the amount of organization and advocacy groups that have formed and come together is incredible. Join a coalition with the same mission. You know, if you're a deaf child, sometimes there's a blind, or an education, you know, coalition. Join those. Don't reinvent the wheel because there's so much work has been done, even though so much work has to be done. Remember that there's local, state, and national. So they might be talking about the same issue on the national level, but that doesn't mean we don't need to accomplish it on the state level. And the second most important thing, persistence. Don't give up. Some of our most impactful laws took years to pass. The American Disabilities Act, the American Care Act, and Laura's Law are just to name a few. Next slide, please. Now, let me give you strategy. That's my favorite thing as a staffer, is to share the strategy. And what I tell people who come to me with an issue or concern or a bill idea, I always tell them to talk to members that represent them because it's more personal. They are more willing to talk to you. There's always one senator and one assembly member, sometimes two. Reach out to also the members who are on the committee that this issue is under. If it's a healthcare issue, you go to members that sit on the health committee. Also reach out to committee consultants. I can't tell you how much they are the most helpful. A lot of times, because I have good relationship with some of the committees my boss sits on, if they hear of an issue related to deafness or an issue related to sickle cell or health issues, they would say, hey, we heard of a bill idea this group is looking for, and some of our bills had come from that. They're also very knowledgeable, and they have historical knowledge, which means they'll say, oh, we tried to pass this bill before, or something like this, that maybe you need to look at it this way in order for it to get passed. So that's really important to know some of the historical ways that bills passed or didn't pass. And if a staffer is unable to help, ask for their advice. They love to give advice and try to be as helpful as possible. Well, at least I know I am, and a lot of my colleagues are. So always ask for their advice before you hang up. Next slide, please. Make contact, as the other advocates have said. Write letters, make calls, use connections. You'll be surprised how many people might know a local, somebody who represents you on a local level that also could reach out to the state level, and also get both local and state leaders involved. That could help as well in getting people together. Next slide, please. Then you set up a meeting. I know some of the other advocates have talked about bringing pictures. Bringing pictures. I say either pictures, bring a child, bring a young adult, and bring a parent to tell their story. I mean, I think it's a broken record, but we can't emphasize how important it is to tell your story. Bring a provider who could talk about the need on a different, level, how it's affecting the clinic, how it's affecting the insurance of taking care of a child. And be prepared to educate, have real numbers. And legislatures get literally piles and piles of paperwork. If you have a 1-page, no more than front and back, and just show numbers, show statistics, that's how it affects the state and your community. That helps a lot. Next slide, please. Also, this may sound weird, but on my international level, I learned this. This is very important. Convince them how big the need is. On an international level, you don't have some of the countries we would visit doesn't have a legislature. It's one person, maybe the Minister of Health. If they're in a bad mood that day, guess what? Whatever you ask them for, you probably won't get. So, we always came and we showed visual, like we've been saying. Always be visual, share your personal stories and hardships, give education. Also invite them to the medical clinic or the education programs that the child goes to. So most of them might not go, but some of them like visiting these centers and see firsthand how these programs are impacting your child. Next slide, please. What I was saying before, and show how government support will save money in the long run, especially now in the budget shortfall. Sometimes when we had to go to different countries, it was very important to say, if you spend money to screen and educate, you're going to have prevention. You'll have less, children maybe with illness, especially if it's a genetic illness. How to do testing when they're young, so that the doctors are right away matched with the kid and they're getting the best quality care from the experienced doctors. And then also make sure you hit home that good health care and access to care, quality care, enables these kids to grow up to be able citizens and have a quality of life. Next slide, please. So before you leave, I know this is always, we've been saying this a lot, but always ask for a follow-up meeting. Try not to leave an office with and yes, okay, always follow up, get their commitment. It also helps to keep the line of communication open. I have a lot of people when they come to see me, I give them my card and I said, if anything changes in this bill, or if there's something that comes up that you would like or you support, but then you don't support anymore because a committee made changes that actually now will hurt your child, make sure you follow up and let us know, because we are your voices to the legislatures. We tell them, oh, we met with XY organization, and this is the issue, and they're supporting these bills. If that's changed, we need to know that too, so that we could give your voice and says, this will actually hurt them because of A, B, and C. And that's, we are their, how do you say? We are the middle person of your voice to the legislature. We want to make sure that that voice is correct, that that voice is heard, and that they vote the best way to support you and their communities. So make sure that you always keep in touch if anything has changed. It also gives you a chance to provide any additional information. There might have been questions asked in a meeting. That's your opportunity to follow up and provide the extra information. It also shows your commitment. I've had a gentleman who has had an idea and he has been so passionate about it, and it's for foster youth. And he's called me 2 years straight. The first time he missed the deadlines, told him not to give up, and he didn't. The next year, when I told him what the legislative calendar was, that it was important to start reaching out to legislative staff in October, November, and December, believe me, he did. And he did the next year, and I remembered him, and I was able to go through these guidelines with him. And be persistent. Like I said, so many laws take a long time. A whole legislative session is a year. If that bill doesn't get, let's say the bill gets all the way to the governor and then gets vetoed, that's another year you have to start all over again. Don't give up. Be persistent. A lot of our laws have taken more years before they were passed than not. So I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone, especially Family Voices and the Specialty Care Coalitions, for letting me be here. And as a sibling, a former medical social worker, and a legislative staffer, the takeaway I hope you leave here today with is know you matter, your child matters, your advocacy matters, your experiences make an impact, and your persistence will make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. That was so helpful to get your perspective as someone who works within the legislature, and you are just a true champion for children and youth with special healthcare needs. So thank you for taking your passion for this population into the state assembly. I think we may have time for a quick question. I was going to turn it over to Erin to introduce herself and do a quick check on the Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can have all panelists onto the screen at once.
Yeah, I just want to start off by giving a heartfelt thank you to our esteemed speakers for your very informative and thoughtful presentations and remarks. I'm personally so moved and inspired by your dedication to advocacy and your personal experiences that you shared today. My name is Erin Kelly, and I'm the Executive Director for the Children's Specialty Care Coalition. And I'm going to be moderating the brief Q&A portion of this session, which we are officially in. So we have several minutes for Q&A, and I encourage you, if you have not submitted a question and have one, to go ahead and submit those in the Q&A box now. Also just want to acknowledge and thank you all for those that are participating, for your thoughtful comments, heart and applause emojis and encouraging words in the chat as well. So I think with that, we did have one question, which I will pull up right now. And I will direct this to all of our panelists. And, you know, if you have something to share, just raise your hand or go ahead and just lead in. The question was, if there's a resource that is available for an adult with special health care needs that is unfortunately orphaned, and where do they go and what is the plan for them? So I don't know if any of our panelists have some insight or perspective to offer as it relates to adults with special health care needs that perhaps don't have that support person or advocate for them.
The first thing that came to mind for me, Erin, was perhaps a resource at the county level. I don't know that, you know, a state level office or agency would perhaps be the most appropriate place. I'm wondering if it's more of like a county welfare office resource.
And we can certainly look, you know, take this back and, you know, follow up too. And we have a couple more questions. So the next one is, can you suggest any resources or organizations to follow to learn about the important disability bills to advocate for? Who would like to take this one?
I was just going to mention when Jim Frazier was speaking earlier today, he listed off some bills that the ARC of California is actually sponsoring. I know Disability Rights California typically has a list of bills as well that would be very relevant to this group. And of course, our organization, the Children's Specialty Care Coalition, has a host of bills that we have positions on. So I would love to follow up with the person who asked this question directly to send the bills that are highest on our radar, and then to perhaps provide links to those other organizations as well. And then of course, there's other groups like Children Now, Children's Partnership, who there would be some overlap, but I think those would be great organizations as well.
I wanted to add to that too. The Disability Rights California has a great website, and they actually have their public policy there. They actually talk about advocating, a lot of good resources, Disability Rights California.org.
Great, good feedback.
And Dawn, I know you wanted to add something too.
Yeah, this is what my talk, when I said like don't reinvent the wheel, really join a coalition or follow a coalition. These are really great groups. Even staff, we look at different websites like Disability Rights and Specialty Care Coalition to see what they're looking at. A lot of them always have a list of their advocacy bills and what they support as well as what they oppose. So I would always check those kind of resources.
We have one more question in the chat, which sounds really exciting about perhaps forthcoming legislation next year. But unfortunately, I have been advised that due to transition back to general session, we have to close. And I'm going to turn it over to Katie, our moderator, to just provide some brief closing remarks. But thank you all for a wonderful, engaging session.
Thanks, Erin. And Dr. Giamona, I have taken note of your questions in the chat, so we will absolutely follow up with you on those since we didn't quite have time to get to them today. But I just want to close the session by thanking all of you for attending and by giving a huge thanks to our panelists. So Dawn, Cecilia, Jenny, and Kelly, thank you for your invaluable insights today, for sharing your personal stories, and for hopefully inspiring many on this webinar to either begin, continue, or deepen their engagement using the information shared here today. So the closing session is beginning right about now at 1:30. So you can all access that by going to the main lobby page. And again, thank you so much for attending today.